Very few of the so-called independent labels are independent labels. I mean, a large majority of the so-called independent labels are actually owned by people like EMI. You know, and they're just a front, because now there is a market in independent music. So what the big companies have done is set up little labels, calling them independent, so that they can then use all of the, say, the independent charts or the independent network to promote their music, because they know on the sort of ABBA scale there's no chance of it being a big seller, but certainly on the independent level they will sell. So a large amount of the independent charts now are actually full up of EMI and Warner Brothers and Polydor and all the rest of them. The music press has done all it can to sort of disguise that existence. It's always attempted to promote and create a movement that has the same ideas, has the same sort of basic reasons behind it, but then it will push it forward and say, well, this is what's happening now. And along with that will come this year's commercial punk bands. And everyone will say they're the real punk, you know, this is the real thing that's happening. But beneath that, there really is a genuine independent circuit. There's independent bands, independent labels, you know, people who are genuinely underground, who are never touched by the music press, never touched by the commercial scene, because they don't want anything to do with it. They're not interested in that at all. There's a lot at stake for someone like EMI, who, on the one level, their record industry is threatened by the new independent bands. On another level, the ideas, social ideas that are being introduced by the independent bands, you know, sort of pacifist, anarchist, whatever ideas, you know, are genuinely threatening people like EMI, who are one of the biggest arms producers in this country. Obviously, EMI aren't going to want bands like us becoming successful on two levels. We affect their record sales and we affect their arms sales, or the atmosphere in which they make their arms sales. So on two levels, and then that's the case with most of the big record companies, that they're all directly or indirectly connected with the arms trade.
For dear.
For obvious reasons, that people don't have much money. Since we've been producing records, we feel that we should sell records so we can do the things we need to do, which is to go out and gig and produce more records by other people, produce handouts, whatever, you know, all the activities that we do. We feel it's justified that we should take something from making records to do that, but we haven't improved our lifestyle because of being a successful band. You know, we don't eat any better, or we don't have better facilities for all of that, and that's why we can sell records, because we don't have 3 Mercedes-Benz out there, and we don't drink Southern Comfort in the evening, we drink tea.
That's how much it costs to put out a record. We put out our records at how much it costs us to produce them. The discrepancy between the price that we sell our records at and the price that standard record would cost, which is about £2. I mean, ours are about £2 cheaper on an album. Represents profit as far as the company is concerned who's putting it out. So, I mean, and they have all sorts of middlemen and entrepreneurs, and they spend an enormous amount of money on promotion and all that sort of shit, which you don't need.
Well, you imagine the sort of drugs bill of sort of a band like The Clash must be enormous. Well, that's what people are paying for when they buy one of their albums. You know, they're paying for their sort of coke habits, you know, and we're not asking people to pay for our habits.
They said that we were trash. Well, the name is CRASS, not Clash.
Punk started as some sort of statement from people in the street and on a sort of street level. That wasn't financially viable. So bands were produced, brought up and cultured by the main record labels, by the business, to synthesize what was happening outside the business. If an industry is based on promotion, which the record business is, if you're promoting something, if you have to promote, bands were produced, brought up and cultured by the main record labels, by the business, to synthesize what was happening outside the business. If an industry is based on promotion, which the record...
White Punks on Hope med CRASS. Skivor ska vara billigt för folk har ont om pengar, säger man. Det avgörande är vad för behov man har själv. Men om man inte tänker sig att leva flott eller har en stor administration som ska avlönas så går det bra. Och inte heller behöver man ett PR-kontor som tänker ut smarta reklamknep för att få en artists skiva att sälja.
Punk started as some sort of statement from people in the street and on a sort of street level. That wasn't financially viable. So bands were produced, brought up and cultured by the main record labels, by the business, to synthesize what was happening outside the business. If an industry is based on promotion, which the record business is, if you're promoting something, if you have to promote it, then you're trying to sell something to someone that they don't know about or that they don't want. You're trying to encourage people to buy.
We could reach a lot of the big firms have offered us distribution deals, which we've refused to do because we won't have our records marketed in an aggressive way. So really we've gone as far as we can and still maintain a policy which we think is honest. I mean, if we bring out a record, it goes out to the shops and no one is obliged or forced or told lies about the quality of it, about what it represents. You know, and the moment you step into the bigger people, all of whom would love to deal with us, then you get aggressive marketing techniques which we won't allow anyone to do on our behalf. There is obviously a limited but growing market for ideas like ours, and the only way that we'd really need huge distribution is if we stopped saying the things we're saying. As it is, that what we're saying is slowly getting accepted and more people are wanting to hear what we're saying and buying our records, and it will grow at its own pace, and when people can't get it, they'll find a way of getting it.
You have to make enormous compromises because the people who buy the records buy them because they hear them on Radio 1, because they're numbed out by the places that they live in, the shit that they hear on the radio, the shit that's all around them. So you've got to compromise and you've got to make your stuff equally as shitty as all the rest of the stuff that's around, and we aren't doing that. I mean, we're putting out what we believe in. So obviously it's not going to go onto that market because we aren't saying, you know, that you should go out and buy a tin of baked beans and you should buy a car and that you should have a sort of straight job. We're not saying that.
There are alternative ways to doing something, and that's what we try to do, not because of doing something differently, simply because everything that's been offered in everything that you do or try to do is corrupt, you know, and it's short-sighted, it's unimaginative, you know, and there's so many areas where you can express yourself, not only in the music or the artwork or the rest of it, but you can express yourself in your whole method of application, the way you go about life, the alternatives that you try to see around the usual accepted monetary and style and all the rest of it method of doing something, which means sod all. It doesn't give anything to anybody, you know. And I think a lot of people have been encouraged by what we do, not just the sound or the words, but encouraged by the way we've done it. You know, we have done it from nothing, and we do still work on a sort of nothing basis because we don't, you know, because of what we want to say and do. And I think people have been encouraged to do that and realise that they can do it from nothing, you know, and that's what's important. People have started their own labels, have started their own magazines, and they've had very little in their pocket, and they've had very little imagination. So they think until they really apply themselves, and then they see there are ways of doing things. It may not be good for, you know, the first time off, but it grows, you know, and you begin to learn a lot more about yourself, and that's really good and exciting.
I think what's happening is that, I mean, like last year there was sort of mass rioting all around the country, and I mean that's basically because we live in a society that doesn't care, and that if enough people cared, then firstly, those sorts of situations wouldn't need to exist, and secondly, the system that creates those sorts of situations doesn't need to exist. And only through sort of a personal demonstration of caring, can it mean anything. It doesn't mean anything to sort of sit at home and think things like that. You have to get out and say that you care. And on that level, I sort of see a lot of what we're trying to do as trying to prevent the country being forced into a sort of bloody revolution, which is on the cards, because the richer are getting richer and the poorer are getting poorer. And no one cares. Whereas if people can be made to care or can be presented with a life that's got some sort of meaning, then they're going to find a creative way of dealing with the problems and something will grow. One of the basic models that needs to be sort of smashed, people talk about smashing the state. Well, I think what needs to be smashed is the whole sort of concept of consumerism, because as long as people are driven into sort of consumer ethic, then they are obliged to be a part of the sort of state slavery. As long as people need the actual bargain to own certain things is the slavery of work. People wouldn't need to do the amount of work, wouldn't need to be the slaves they are if they didn't have the requirements that they're told they should have, to a holiday for 2 weeks, or a colour television, or a car, or whatever.
In this country, there's been a history of people being polarised towards the right wing, and probably this year people will be polarised towards the left wing by the people in the media who will benefit by that. 3 or 4 years ago, the left wing groups, to promote themselves, needed an enemy, so they polarised an easily identifiable subgroup in the population, which were young, pissed off, people with no particular future in sort of the working class, people who cut their hair short, as being right-wing members, where those people wouldn't necessarily have any right-wing ideas in their head at all. So they politicised and polarised a large portion of the population for their own promotion. And we're living with that. And this year we'll probably see those same people polarised into the sort of left-wing groups.
The worst violence we've encountered is attacks from the music press and people like that, whose attacks have been very, very violent. When you think, if one skinhead turns up at a gig, there's a very good chance you can talk to them and stop them doing what they're trying to do, and you generally find they're not sort of Nazis or anything, they're just people who, as Pete says, are just pissed off. But there are very intelligent, educated, trained people in the press who sit down to destroy what people who care are trying to do for their own ends, and without any question, a lot of the strongest attack has come from Marxists who don't happen to like anarchists and never have done. And so the real violence we've encountered has been from them. It's been the violence of the pen, but it's been the one that's created the worst atmosphere that we've had to deal with. I think that's a really important thing, but particularly for people who aren't in this country, to realise that generally speaking, what's called the right wing in this country is a particular class of people who have got no voice, who aren't allowed a voice, who aren't permitted inroads into anything. They're at the absolute end of the sort of social register, and the only voice they've got is their fist. In that respect, and they're mostly, like we said earlier, they're mostly individuals who can be dealt with individually. Increasingly, the liberal media is dominated by left-wing thinkers who are far more dangerous, far more damaging, far more violent in intent than the majority of the so-called Nazis, who in 2 years' time will all have settled down with a wife and will be working and living very ordinary lives.
There are millions of people in this country who are pissed off with the way that things are. and they're all in isolation. Like, you get lots of little people all over the place who sit down and say, oh, I'm pissed off with doing this, what the fuck can I do? If they see somebody who's putting something out, who's in the same position as they are, who's saying, you know, you can fucking do something about it, and you're not the only person who's pissed off. You're sitting out there in your bedroom feeling sorry for yourself. But there are thousands and millions of people who feel the same, and I think that that's one reaction that we can get, is a feeling of that, you know, you're not the only one, you're not alone. To show people that you can do what you want to do if you want to, is a really good reaction. It gives people some sort of reason for doing something.
Yeah, I don't think in any way we capitalise on people. I mean, we offer something, and people identify with so much of it. It seems to say what they think, and they can't express it, which is good. I mean, there's 1,000 ways people take the lyrics and everything that we do, and I just think it's we don't in any way try and sell anything. We don't try and capitalise on people's emotions and what have you, which is the usual way.
I think a lot of people realise that there are people who are fed up with the way things that are, and you know that can be so damaging. If you put something there, it can be so damaging for those people, like this fucking oi shit recently, like sex and violence or kill a mod. You know, somebody will be sitting there feeling pissed off, and then they'll think, oh, they'll hear sex and violence, and that's what they'll do, you know, because they aren't given themselves, you know. People haven't got themselves anymore. They feel that you've got to be led by some idiot on a TV screen, or somebody who puts themselves in a position of power. You don't have to do that. And, you know, and the oi movement has been responsible for saying, you know, it's good to feel disillusioned. It's good to sit on a fucking street corner and put a bottle in the face of somebody who hasn't got the same skin colour as you. And it's not fucking good, you know. It's really dangerous, and it's sort of romanticised that image. People will look everywhere for something to run their life on. They'll look for a hero. They'll look, which they might find in a pop band, or they might find in a political figure, or they'll look for some God-sent reason to live. And all those things are really promoted in order to avoid people thinking for themselves. In order to avoid people thinking, you know, I'm my own God, you know, I'm the person who's running my fucking life, and no sort of abstract idea, or no pop star, or nobody, no heroes, you know. And that if when people realise that, which I think that they can't fail to realise, when they see that the rulers that they put their faith in are going to end up dropping a fucking bomb on the place and wiping everything out. I mean, if people see that, they'll then see that, you know, the only way that you can get round that is by living your own life with dignity and treating people in the same way. People tend to see you as being something special, you know, and people will come up to us and ask us for an autograph, for instance, in order so that they can see you as being, you know, not part of the life that they live. And, you know, and we'd say to them, what the fuck do you want an autograph for? You know, I'm the same as you are. You know, I shit the same, I eat the same, you know, I bloody live in the same place.
They don't shit the same.
No, they probably don't shit the same. But, you know.
People don't expect people who can really do things to be on the outside, because everyone who can really do things gets bought up. And I think particularly with the artwork, it's very easy to see, and not just the paintings rather than the collage, you know. I mean, that standard of painting, which is brilliant, why on earth is a sort of scrappy, dirty little underground band like CRASS? Why can someone paint like that? And that's the shock of it, you know. The shock of it is the standard of the quality of it against the content of it, because people don't expect to see the sort of content we deal with presented in that sort of way. And I think it shocks all of all the preconceptions about something. I mean, one sees lots and lots of shocking collages, and I don't think they hit you in the same way that the paintings, that a lot of the paintings that we've put out do, in the sense that they're shocking because they're so bloody good.
I mean, we do use them as information sheets, sort of like a magazine, and I think that shocks people too, because they're usually there to enhance the inside solely. You know, it's a selling the cover is there to sell the record, and we use it very much in a very different way. We use it for people to really get information from and to understand probably a bit more the content. And I think that's really what people get attracted to too, and feel maybe as a shock, because some of that information is not information that is readily available to most people.
I mean, a lot of people would say, oh, this LP is £2.50 or whatever it is, £2.25 for an LP. If it's that cheap, it must be shit. And that's another preconception which we try and get over, because if people see things that are cheap, they usually assume that they aren't going to be very good, that they've cut the corners and it's going to be a bad product. That is one reason for us to make it even better than the records that are full price.
There are alternatives to the way we do things. There are different ways of doing things. What there aren't alternatives to is maintaining your own integrity intact. So if bands in Sweden want to do it, they have to maintain their integrity. That is crucial. The idea that if you can get 5,000 records out rather than 500 means that you're going to be 5 times as powerful, so that it's actually worth compromising yourself a little bit by signing to some label, is actually totally fallacious, because it doesn't matter. It's the quality of what goes on out, and it's your own integrity which is crucial. It's not the quantity, and which is almost like a truism. You go for quality rather than quantity.
No, at the moment it isn't, although it could be quite easily. But at that time it was Asylum. Yes, it was Asylum. And they were advising shops not to stock it, not to sell it, and especially to people underage.
Anyway, if you bomb something, you might be sort of blowing up a building or blowing up a car, but you aren't changing anything. I mean, even if you shoot somebody, you aren't changing anything, because there'll be somebody else in their place. But if you can put out something which actually makes people think about their preconceptions, if you put out something like Reality Asylum, which through heavily attacking and criticising the institution of religion may create space in people's mind for them to be able to think beyond the restrictions of that religion. People to be able to think, well, maybe if I say God's a shit, there won't be a bloody thunderclap coming down to strike me down, because there won't be, and it creates it means that people will think beyond the restrictions that the system imposes, and it's those mental restrictions that is what keeps people in their place. We come into contact with a lot of people who are doing things in the same sorts of areas that we are. And it has developed, as with the Boys and Girls and Captain Sensible, that, for instance, with Captain Sensible, he wanted to put out a record which was free of the restrictions which were imposed on him by the record label that he was on at the time. He wanted to make his own statement in an independent way, independent of the music business.
Which he couldn't on the label.
Which he couldn't on his own label, no.
No, he couldn't within his own band, I mean, let alone the label. I mean, the band weren't interested in what he'd got to say, so he decided to do something on his own where he could say what he wanted to say.
Do you, Ambassador Zorin, deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate...
Someone doesn't come to us and say, well, look, the way you've done this tape, will you put it out? Because that isn't, we're not a business. We want to share energies and enthusiasm for things with people. So people come to us and we say, well, look, okay, that's good, let's try and record it really well, let's try and make the cover really nice, and let's work on it together if you want us to. If not, we'd like to come along just to sort of watch you work. And I mean, like with the Captain, he produced that. Well, he and I produced it, but he did most of the work on it. And that was a situation where someone said, well, look, I don't want you to take control of it. And I said, well, can I come along and just be a part of it, to learn from you? And that way we learn from people. We're not sort of an authority that says that's how it should be. at the same time we've got a lot of skills which we can offer people, and it's a sort of trying to share. I mean, it was very exciting to do the captain because he was the first some person who'd come along who knew how to use a studio, whereas most of the bands we record, we know better how to use a studio than they do. So, I mean, I learnt an enormous amount from him just watching how he worked on a control desk. And so that way we can grow.
We don't operate as a label in that one of the things about working with other bands is that we make an agreement with them that we'll only put out one single. So, for instance, with a band like the Snipers or the Flux of Pink Indians, who we had met through going around and doing gigs and just being in contact, you know, we can offer them the sort of pressing and distribution of the record on our label, which might give them more public exposure.
We got singles coming out by a band called Conflict, band called The Mob. We've just put one out by a band called Dirt. We've got we're recording The Cravat, a band called The Cravats. We got singles coming out by a band called Conflict, band called The Mob. We've just put one out by a band called Dirt. We've got we're recording The Cravat, a band called The Cravats, and another band called Rudimentary Peni. And then we've got our own album coming out, and we've got another Bullshit coming out, and then a selection of poems by a guy called Andy T. I mean, that's about all we've got on the cards at the moment.